Hello and welcome to Testing in Django. So this tutorial is going to give you an introduction to Django model testing. So in this tutorial, we're going to cover 4 items here. So first of all, test organization. Just going to give you a few ideas on how you might want to organize your tests. And then of course, we're moving to model testing. So the idea here is that we'll start with a simple model and then we'll add items to the model, typical things you might want to add to your or include in your models and items that might need testing. So while we're doing this, I'm going to introduce a package called coverage. Assuming that you're completely new to testing, one of the important questions that you probably asked is, well, what do I actually need to test? So this is going to be a good package to answer that question. And then finally, I'll introduce you to a package called Model Bakery. This is just going to create, as it says here, fixtures for our testing. So assume that you've got a massive database. So this package is essentially going to auto-create data for you in your model when you're utilizing a model to test. So instead of having to populate the whole model, this will auto-generate items for you. Okay, so first up, let's just talk a little bit about test management or folder and file structure. So first of all, we realized from the first tutorial that we have tests in this test.py file here. So we can remove this. And then what we can do here is that we can create a new folder. So this is one folder structure that you might want to follow. So inside of here, we could, for example, call this tests, if you wanted to. And then inside of here, we could then manage our files. So for example, we might want to run model tests in a separate file, and then our views, and then our URLs. So we would separate our tests into individual files in that manner. Now, if we wanted to work this way, we would need to include a dunder init file. So that would be important to include here, and we'll see why shortly. So we're going to be utilizing this method here. So a second method we could utilize, we might want to test per feature rather than model, view, URLs, etc. in a separate file. So here we would have a separate folder. Maybe again you'd call it tests, test2, and then inside of here we would have a folder. So for everything we wanted to test, for every feature, we would have a folder associated to that feature. So here I'd have a new folder called comments. Inside of comments, I would then have my file tests. And obviously that would include all my tests that's associated to this feature, the comments feature of my application. Of course, there's many different ways you can structure your folders for testing, but those are just 2 very common ways you'll probably read online and in books of structuring your tests. So we're going to be utilizing this first method. So I'm just going to remove this. And we're going to go into the model because we're going to be testing some models. So we're going to need a model to test. So I've headed over to the app 1 models. I've created this very simple model. So we're going to start simple and we're going to add on items to this model and expand our testing. So we'll also include the model string representation. So our function here, our dunder string function, and that's going to return the title. So now let's think about testing this model. So the biggest question here is, what exactly do I test? So what we're going to do now is install a package which is going to identify for us potential areas that we need to test in this model. So let's go ahead and pip install, and we're going to run a package called coverage. So this package is going to give us an insight into what potentially needs to be tested inside of this model here. And it's going to give us 2 interfaces. We can use the interface here in the console, or it's going to provide us a HTML page, which we can utilize for more information about what tests we might want to run. So let's have a look at how we can actually utilize coverage. So if we run coverage run manage py tests, that's going to run the tests associated in this project. So it's going to look for all the tests and try and run them. Obviously, we don't actually have any tests at the moment, so that's the command we're going to utilize for that. So once we run some tests, we can then check the report, the coverage report, and it gives us details on areas potentially that we need to test. So we can run coverage report. So here what you're going to notice is it picks up quite a lot of different things here, but if you look at the results here, you can see it comes from the virtual environment. Moving up to the top here, you'll eventually find your application or app 1, and there's some tests here that might need completing. So what we need to do is remove the virtual environment from this report, and to do that we just need to run a separate command where we can omit the venv or the virtual environment folder that we've created. So if you're not using the virtual environment, you're not going to have this come up, but you can see here that I've got the virtual environment here in a folder called VMV. So what you need to do here is just run the command again, but here use the omit and then define the folder that you want to omit here and carry on. So we run the test now, and then we can now get the results. So if I now run the results again, you can now see it just indicates, or it just shows the application and avoids the virtual environment folder. So having a look at these results here, what's something to point out is this section here, our app 1 models. So there's 6 statements in this model, and apparently we've missed one. So here's indicating that potentially there is a test that's required. And here we have coverage. So the idea here is a little bit like a game, really. You're trying to build as many tests as possible to get 100% coverage of testing in these particular areas. So this isn't always going to show you all the tests that you need to do, but for beginners who are looking into testing in Django, this is a very good indicator to help guide you on what is needed to be tested. So to help you define this further, what we can do is we can run the coverage HTML. So let's run this. It's just coverage HTML. And this is going to provide you a new section here on the left-hand side. You can see a new folder here. Inside of here, we have an index. So I'm just going to copy that path. So I've opened up a new browser and I've copied and pasted the link that I copied there. You saw me copy. And you can now see, I can see the coverage report. And what's handy about this is I can drill down into my model. So I can select this item here and it tells you now exactly what potentially is missing. So here it's indicating the fact that I need to test this dunder string method here. So that is exactly what we need to do first. So now let's go ahead to the test and actually build a test to actually overcome this missing test that's required. Okay, so head over to app 1 in test folder. Here I'm going to be utilizing the model file here for my tests. And of course, make sure you've got this dunder method here, otherwise you'll have problems actually running the test. We'll see that shortly in action. So in the model file, we're going to have a line of code here, which is going to bring in the test case. So let's get that in. And then we need to go ahead and actually import the table. So we're going to be utilizing that. So we're not actually going to be running these tests on the actual table. The tests are going to create a separate table for us to actually run the tests, remember. And then we build a new class. So this is going to be our tests. And here I'm going to test app models. So I've called it test app models. And I've imported I'm utilizing or extending from the test case. And here I'm going to create a new function. So this is going to be called test model string. Okay, so what do I need to do to test this model string? So if I go back in, you can see that this string is going to output the title. So what I'm essentially doing here is I'm just checking to make sure if I'm utilizing a post or if I'm outputting a post, that the title of the post equals the title of the output of this string here. So that's what we're trying to do. So first of all, we go and we create some data for our new table that we're going to make for testing, essentially. So post objects create, and then the title is just going to be called Django testing. So I've added this piece of information. I could go ahead if I wanted to and add some content. So I can just extend this and add some content here, equals content. So once I've got that information in, I'll just remove that for now. We'll now go over, and you can also additionally just make a new line for the content. So you can add in information that way if you prefer. So now we've got the data ready in our test database, we can now test. So what we're doing here is we're using an assert equal. So basically what we're trying to say here is that this item here needs to equal this item here. So here we have str. So in this instance, the dunderstring method is called whenever you use or whenever you call the str function here on an object. So this is essentially a really simple test. You can see that we're going to just call this title, and obviously it's going to represent this here. So let's now go ahead and run this test. So just to make your life a little bit easier potentially, I've added all the different commands. I'll add some more as we go along in this testing series. Some useful commands, that will be easy for you to access if you forget them, and that you can utilize in these tutorials and when you're testing. So there's a whole load of different commands here, and I'll just try and add 2 of them. If you find that I've forgotten any, then please just let me know in the comments and I'll add them into the commands text. So let's now go ahead and try and run these tests. So here we're going to run this here. So we want to run the test in app 1, so we go ahead and do that. So here it says ran 0 test. Now let's just expand this and see what the potential problem is here. So it says manage Pi test 1, system check identified no issues, ran 0 tests. So there's clearly something going wrong here because we have actually defined 1 test. So what we're going to need to do here in actual fact, in our dunder init file here, if we open this up, move this down, we're going to need to add a line here for it to be utilized correctly and to pick up everything that we need. So what we're going to do here is say from models, import all. Now, in actual fact, it's going to be model, import all. So what we're doing here is we're just importing, or we're just including all of the tests that are inside of this model here. So now what we're going to do is go back here and try and run the tests again, and you can see that we've got a problem. So it says here no such table app1 posts. So I'm just trying to honestly, I am just trying to give you an idea of some of the different problems that you might have. Here again, I'm assuming that you're new to Django, or you're fairly newish to Django whilst undertaking this tutorial. So you can pretty much guess potentially what the problem is here. We've created a new table and we haven't actually migrated the data. So the table doesn't actually exist yet, no such table. So let's go ahead and make migrations, and we'll go ahead and then migrate, and then we're going to run the test again. So test app 1, and this time you can see that we've ran 1 test and everything was okay. So there are a few different ways of testing the string, the dunder string. So if you do have any different ways and you want to share them in the comments, please do, and I will update this to include the different options and different methods of doing that. Okay, so that's running the test, but of course we need to use coverage here. So we're going to run the test using coverage. So coverage run manage Pi test app. So go ahead and do that, and that's then going to allow us then to update the HTML. So we'll do that. We'll do the coverage HTML. That's going to produce a new HTML list, and of course it's going to be in the same place as where it was previously. So we can just go ahead and access the HTML page, and then let's just do a refresh. And you can now see we have 6 statements here and there's 0 missing. So there's 0 tests that need to be done. So essentially this is 100% tested. Congratulations. Okay, so now let's expand our model. So back in the app 1 models here, we're just going to make this a little bit more complex. So now we're adding the user. So we're going to import the users from the models of the auth model. We're then going to now build a many-to-many. So you don't necessarily have to test a many-to-many, but you can do, of course. And so we're going to do that next. So this is a many-to field. We've got likes. So this indicates all the users that have liked this post. That's essentially what's going to happen here. So if you're following the simple blog project that I'm running at the moment, you'll notice that our table has this. So to test that, we can follow this procedure. So now if we head back into the test, let's think about how we're now going to do that. Of course, let's just not forget this time to make the migrations, and then obviously migrate. Oh, sorry. What was going on there? Okay, so we've migrated that. Let's go and head into the testing now. So let's build a test for this many-to-many. Okay, so we're going to need the user model. So we've imported that in there. And then we're going to create a new function here. So this is going to be test post like users. So what we're going to need here is obviously some users. So let's just build a user to begin with. So we're going to call that test user. And you can see here we've got user objects create user, and we're going to give it a username and a password. So that's pretty much all we're going to need there. Then what we're going to do in actual fact is we're going to build two users. So let's go ahead and do that. Of course, we could just use one or two. I just want to give you an example of utilizing two users. And then we're going to need an actual post. So let's go ahead and build a post. So this is just going to have a title, and here you can also see that I've included content and a slug. So we've just added some new items here in this new post that we've created. Now slug doesn't actually exist yet, so we'll get rid of that. Right, so now what we need to do is test this out. So before we can test this, we need to actually add some users to this entry in the database. So if you remember, we've got title, content, and likes. So we need to refer these users or add them to the like section of this post entry here. So let's just do that first. So we're going to need to set this up in a way that we take in the title and then define the likes and then .set, and then we set the test user primary key for the test user, and then the test user 2, we set the primary key here. So now we've got two users associated in this single post right here. So essentially what we're testing now is that there are two users associated to this post here. So let's go ahead and do that. So again, we're just going to count the amount of likes we have in this user post here, or this post here. So assert equals, so on the left hand side we have title likes count. So we count how many likes there are, or users that have liked this post, and that should equal 2. Okay, so let's go ahead now and test that out. So we coverage run manage by test app 1. So that should now include 2 tests. So we ran 2 tests. They were all okay. You can see that destroying the test database has been completed. So now we've got 2 tests. So let's just see, let's just remove this test temporarily and just see if it gets picked up by coverage. So let's just run coverage again. And then we'll run the coverage HTML. Oh. So let's just see if it gets picked up first as something that needs to be tested. So if we go back into the browser and refresh, so it isn't actually identifying this as something that does actually need to be tested. So like I said, some developers might actually test this, but you may choose not to. So I just wanted to provide an example of doing that. Of course, you could do the same with the one-to-many links as well if you wanted to. Okay, so the next stage, let's just build this up further, this table. So this time we're going to add a slug. So we're going to use this slug field to utilize or create and get absolute URL. Let's pretend that we've created a post field here, and we want to, on one page, for example, show all posts, and then on another page show a single post. So we want to get the absolute URL for that single post. So let's just set up a function here, so a get absolute URL, and we're using reverse, so we need to kind of import that in. So what we're doing here is that in our templates, we can use the get absolute URL to actually get the URL of a single post. And that will then auto generate a URL string that can be placed in a link, a HTML link. And we click on that and it takes us then to that page. You can see here that we're using the slug for this. So that's how we're linking to or creating the link. So let's just quickly go into the views and we'll just build up these views here. So there's going to be two views. We're going to have a home view and then also a post single view. So here we're just rendering out a new template called index and just showing all the posts. And then here we've got the detail page where we're just going to show the individual item. Notice here it says slug equals post. So we're going to get the post from the database utilizing the post name or the post slug. So here, just to clarify what's going on, when the user clicks on a single item, that would take them to their single post page, and that's all referenced via the slug. So yeah, essentially we're just going to test this get absolute URL. So let's just go ahead and create a new folder here. We're going to call this templates. You can skip ahead if you don't want to see all this. So we've got templates here. So we've got two templates that we're going to create. I've already pre-made them. So in here, we're just going to loop through the post that we might have. And then here, we're just going to show the post title and post content. So just two simple pages just for now, just to see that it's working. And here you can see that we're using the get absolute URL. So of course, we're going to need some URLs. So let's go ahead and type in urls.py. And then we're going to need some URLs here. So let's go ahead and create those. So here we're just going to, using this namespace app1, here we've got two URLs, one for the home and one here for the actual single page where we take in the path of the slug post. So we're generating the slug, we're generating the get absolute URL slug via the slug. And then we're utilizing that to then identify an individual single post and then displaying it on the details page. So with that in place, obviously we need to go to the core and we just need to replace these URLs with the new set of URLs. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we've just got one for the admin and then one single one here for app1 URLs. And that just connects via the namespace app1. Okay, so let's just go ahead and create a new super user. So I've gone ahead and created a new super user. I've gone into the admin of app1. I've just registered the post in the admin here, and I've turned the server on. So now we can go back into the server. I've already logged in. Okay, so I just make a new post here, press save. This is really just to show that it's working. So you can see here that we've got this item here and we've got the /new, so that's taken from the slug. So if I inspect this, you can see we're getting the link via, if I go back into the code, you can see in the templates, again, just to, we're getting the absolute URL, which is the post. If we go back into the model, it's the post slug. We're getting it from the slug, which we wrote as new. So title was new, slug was new. So that's how that's all being generated. And you can see I'll click on that and it takes us to the post. So if you weren't too familiar about what that meant in terms of get absolute URL, you now absolutely know, hopefully, what that's all about. So we're now going to test this. So let's first of all just double check that it needs testing. So let's go ahead and utilize coverage. So let's just run the tests again, the coverage tests. So we've still got 2 tests at the moment. So now let's go ahead and run the HTML again. And then we head over to the coverage page. So just refresh and you can now see that we've got 1 missing. So you're probably seeing a pattern here in tests. So custom methods in your model, you're going to test, yeah, or you should test that. That's usually tested with a unit test. So that's essentially what we're doing here. So let's go ahead now and go in our tests and now make the test for this absolute URL. So here's the problem I've got at the moment. You can see I'm repeating myself or repeating code quite a lot here. So we're trying to obviously follow the dry principles here, don't repeat yourself. So let's have a look at what we can do to potentially change this. So what we have available is a function here, setup function. So we can utilize this in the other functions here. So what we can do, instead of creating a new item every single time manually, we can just define it once here in the setup. So let's go ahead and do that. So here I'm going to create a new user or 2 new users. I'm going to create a new post entry and apply the users in that post entry like we did before. So what I can do now is go ahead and cut out some of this code here potentially. So anywhere where it repeats, so for example here, we can get rid of that. Now you'll notice that the title is now Django and not Django testing. So let's just change that. So that's what the title is going to equal. Potentially we don't need that. So let's just go ahead and run this. Just run this one test to see if this gets picked up. So you can clearly see that that wasn't going to work because we had the yellow underline here. So we need to reference the title here, like I've done here, in order for us to utilize this information in this function. So we're just using self.title here. So now if we go ahead and run this test, we should have a pass, run one test, everything is okay. So I want to show you what's happening here with utilizing setup. So all I'm going to do is just copy this twice. I could just tell you, but I thought I'd just show you. Let's just write here print. Let's just print something. Hello on a database. Database creation. Okay, so let's go ahead in the console here and just run the tests again. So I should be running 2 tests here. I've called them the same, haven't I? Let's just call this 1 and 2. So let's just go ahead again and test these. So you can see I've run it, the test now, and notice that DB creation appears twice. So this is important to understand, that when we utilize setup and we define our testing parameters, in this case our model data, you can see that's going to be individually created for each test. So you can imagine here that if you're running quite a lot of tests here, that's going to take quite a lot of time. So Django does provide a different method. So what we can utilize here is the setup test data. So if I copy across that, so this is setup test data. Here we're just doing the same thing again, referencing across the title so that we can utilize the data. So here you can see that if I were to run the same situation again, so if I do a print again of database test, I need to just have that across. Let's just run these model tests again. So number 1 and number 2. So hopefully this time, when we go ahead and test this, we should only make 1 instance of the table. Okay, sorry, I've forgotten the @class method. Okay, so with that in place, Let's just save that. So let's go ahead now in the terminal and run the test again. So we run the tests, and this time notice that we only get db test 1. So essentially what's happening here is this data is going into memory and it's just being utilized again for the next test. So we aren't actually rebuilding this data. Okay, so now we've gone ahead and I've just refactored everything now into place. You can see now we've created our 3 tests, and it's completely referencing our setup data up the top here. So notice the use of self to reference the testing setup data. And here, for example, you can utilize seal the selfs, and also be careful, maybe not a very good naming here of the variable title. So this isn't essentially the title, this is just creating a new instance. So this really should just say new. So let's just go ahead and refactor that. So here you can see that I've changed it all to new. So we're just saying a new record. So a new post object create, and then go into new and set the likes and so on. So if you're not familiar with this type of syntax, down here, for example, we want to get the count of the likes. So we start with self. So that brings us over here to our setup data and then new. So now we're inside of a new, and inside of new, there's likes. So we added the likes here in actual fact to it. So new, and then likes, and then we count. So we're just counting how many of these items that we have. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of how to set up some simple tests of some very familiar functions and setups you might have within your model. So finally, for this tutorial, we're going to have a look at the model baker, or the model bakery. So what we need to do is just pip install that. So go ahead and get that installed. So pip install model bakery. So like I said in the preview or in the introduction, this is going to be a tool that's going to auto-generate data for us, particularly if we've got large data sets. Because you can see here, for example, we're only using content, slug, and new, but obviously your tables might be quite large. So if you want to replicate a lot of data in your database, this is definitely a method of doing that. So head over to the top here. What we need to do is just import that into our project. And once we've done that, we can now set something up. So let's just build something at the bottom here. I'm just going to build a simple class, a new class. I'm just going to call this test new. And you can see here what we're doing is I'm also bringing in pretty print. So just here. So I'll put that in as well. So you can see what we're doing here. So we're just using the setup again. And this time we're using Baker to make the data. So basically it's going to find this model. It's going to look at all the different model elements or the different fields, that the model has. And it's going to then identify what needs to be placed within it. So let's go back to the test. So what we're going to do here is just going to print it out so you can see what's happening. So this on its own won't work because we're using setup. Setup's only going to be initiated if we actually run a test on the data. So this here is just a simple setup. So you can see that you can actually overwrite the baker. So if there is information that you want to type, variably there will be, or to add, you can add the data yourself. But here you can see that I'm just going to return the string. So it should say Django testing. So while this test is set up, it's going to use this information and it's going to print out what the baker has made. So let's give that a go. So this time I'm going to drill down and actually just run this individual test. I'm just going to be utilizing manage py test and then app1 test and then model. So that's the file. And inside of here, we've got the class test new. So I'm just going to run all the tests or the functions in there. So let's just go ahead and do that. And you'll see that what's happened here is our baker has made some data, and you can see all the data that is built here. So the slug and the title and the content and so on. So head across to the manual We'll potentially use this later in later tutorials, but I just wanted to show you it is quite a useful tool to have potentially if you want to test the whole data or you want to utilize the whole data set in your models. Okay, so hopefully you'll agree that's a much better tutorial than the first in this series. I definitely need to look at that and change that. It's definitely not a very good tutorial. I do apologize about that. There is some information in the first tutorial that is useful towards the end, but it's very weak to say the least. So I do apologize for that. So hopefully I made up here in testing the models in Django. This was an introduction. We've covered quite a lot in this tutorial. We have briefed you on some test organization. We've looked at model testing. We've gone through the basics that you might find or utilize within your models when you're starting up using Django. So hopefully now you can apply this or start to apply this in your projects. So I hope you see the benefit of having coverage. I will definitely be utilizing it later for the views and so on in our testing. It is a good tool to use it almost like a game. It tests, it shows you where you need to make tests. It allows you to kind of think about tests in a way that if you want to kind of drop into testing, test some things and go back to development, and then maybe you see that you do some more testing later, it's kind of structured in a way that if you do forget something, well, it's there. It's going to show you what you need. And then you can play around and try and create more tests and then until you complete the 100% coverage. So again, hopefully you enjoyed and the model bakery application will be becoming useful for you. And thank you very much. So hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.